Welcome to Surviving Roots, the podcast where we journey through the complexities of our emotions together. I'm your host, Carrie Fund, and I'm here to guide you on a path of self-discovery, understanding, and healing. In each episode, we'll explore a range of emotions and experiences, from navigating grief and trauma to managing stress and anxiety. Through candid conversations, expert insights, and practical strategies, we'll uncover the tools you need to navigate life's emotional landscape with resilience and grace. So, let's embark on this transformative journey together. Take a deep breath. Allow yourself this time. This podcast is for you. Today, we have a truly inspiring guest who embodies the core message of my podcast, turning pain into power and surviving our roots. Gila Pfeffer is the brilliant mind behind the newly released book, Nearly Departed, Adventures in Loss, Cancer, and Other Inconveniences. Gila Pfeffer is an essayist and humorist. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, The New Yorker, McSweeney's, Today.com, and Oprah Daily. Gila's monthly Feel It on the First campaign uses humor to remind women to prioritize their breast health. She splits her time between New York City and London. Nearly Departed is her first book. Thank you for joining me today and welcome, Gila.
It is my absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you.
I am so excited to dive in. First, congratulations on your first book, Nearly Departed. I loved it. I feel like I need five podcast interviews with you. I want to go through every page. But I will say your journey is a testament to the resilience and courage that we often discussed on my podcast. And throughout your book, readers are taken on this emotional voyage, witnessing the numerous times that you chose courage over fear and empowerment over despair. So thank you for writing this book.
I kind of had to. You're welcome, but I had no choice because whatever was inside me saying write the book was getting super annoying, and I just had to put that thing to rest. So, but thank you for reading it, and thank you for reading it with such a careful eye and an open heart too.
Oh, well, thank you. You have faced a profound losses at a young age, and I would like for you to see if you could share with us like how you navigated grief with losing both your parents and what inner strength you discovered about yourself.
Huh. It's funny when you're talking about something so far in the future or looking back so far in the past from when it happened. Because when I talk about how I navigated the grief now, I think it looks different to how I did it then. And that's always the challenge, I think, of the memoirist to bring the past into the immediate present. So I think the way I navigated it was primarily a sense of, very on brand for your podcast, a sense of a survival instinct.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm blessed with this built-in device that says, figure it out, survive, live. All four of my grandparents were Holocaust survivors. They went through the camps. They had numbers tattooed on their arms, and they didn't talk about it a lot, but some of that survival way of thinking or way of being, the epigenetics must have seeped into me, and I'm thankful for that, for what that's worth. But I guess I coped with it the way a lot of people cope with it, which is when you don't see you have any other choice, you do what you have to do. So we all like to say to each other, "Oh, I could never deal with what you're dealing with," and to that I say, "Well, yeah, you could if you
Mm-hmm.
if you had to." And so that's how I coped with it. And ultimately, so many years later, writing the book was, I don't want to say cathartic because that's like a little bit of a trite word. I think it was empowering, and it was taking back my power from all these things that happened. It was saying, I'm going to turn this into art for myself and that other people can hopefully benefit from and feel from and use as a cautionary tale. So I think if you look at all that together, that's the survival mechanism.
Wow, wow. And you're Jewish, so sitting Shiva is part of the grieving process when you lose a loved one. For everyone listening that's not familiar with what a Shiva is and that process, could you explain a little bit about that?
With pleasure. So the word Shiva means literally number seven. That's the Hebrew word for seven. And different cultures and religions have different mourning rituals, different all kinds of rituals. But Jewish mourning rituals revolve around the initial 7 days post burial when you lose an immediate family member. So, parent, child, spouse. You do something which is right after the funeral, which is called sitting Shiva. You sit for 7 days. And that means you, and people observe this to different degrees. The way we did it through our pretty strict Orthodox lens was that we didn't leave the house. So when I say you're sitting, you really are, all the mourners are sitting on low chairs so that friends, family, neighbors, people you haven't seen in 30 years
Mm-hmm.
have the opportunity to pay their respects not only to the deceased, but to the people who are sitting Shiva, the mourners. And the idea is that your entire existence, your entire being, for reason for waking up in the morning and going to bed at night, is to be immersed fully in this mourning period. You're not going to work. You're not even preparing your own meals. There are people who do that for you. You just sort of sit there and receive guests from morning till night, in the weirdest party ever because you're not really partying, but it's an opportunity to, some people show photos in photo albums. Some people talk about their loved ones, with humorous stories, some through sad stories. A lot of mourners will hear stories from visitors that they never knew about their lost loved one, and that's comforting. But the idea around the 7 day mourning period is that it's this bubble that protects you from the rest of the world. Instead of saying, well, sorry your mom died, time to go back to work and go to the supermarket. What could feel more incongruous to losing someone you love than the mundanities of life? So it's almost like the way the body sends numbing agents to the site of a wound to kind of give
Mm-hmm.
you that brief respite so you can do whatever comes next. Shiva, the way I see it and what I've read about it and the way I've experienced it for both my parents, is this very comforting bubble where you don't have to interact with the outside world just yet. And your wound has a tiny bit of time to heal before you have to face any of that.
That's so beautiful. It's not just like the one day and then, kick everybody out and life goes on. Like you're really sort of forced to be surrounded by loving people and really feel your feelings. And I feel like that would be so important in the grieving process.
And it's exhausting, it's distracting, like you don't realize it. You wake up, the men gather in their in numbers of 10 or more for prayers that would normally happen in synagogue, but then all that comes over to the house. Basically anything that happens in the outside world religiously now comes into your house, and you can I say it's a beautiful time. There's just something very beautiful about being surrounded by all this love. But again, it's such a distraction.
Hmm.
When you want to, if you want to distract yourself from anxiety or you're waiting for news, you'll keep yourself really, really, really busy.
Yeah.
And there is nothing busier than a Shiva house, especially a young Shiva house where not only my parents' friends were coming to visit, but my friends, my siblings' friends. It was just bumping all day long. You just went to bed completely fried at the end of the day. So that's another layer of protection in that you really don't have the time or energy to immerse yourself too much in the grief, which of course comes later when Shiva's over.
Right, right. You've dealt with a lot. People in life, just a little bit of backstory. When my daughter was 2 months old, my husband was diagnosed with cancer. And I remember when that big C came knocking at our door and I opened it and he said, I have cancer. The doctor said I have cancer. I just remember all the air going out of the room. And then immediately we sort of just went into like the motions of like, okay, fighting this. It came knocking on your door 3 times, like with your
Yeah.
mother and then your father and then yourself. Can you tell us a little bit about your story?
Yeah, so with my mother, the book opens when I'm 18 and we're in JFK Airport, and she chooses possibly the weirdest time in the world to blurt out, I think I might have cancer, because she'd already, I guess, had some signs. Um, I was not shocked. And this was actually difficult to write about because I think the flattering way to write about myself would have been to say, oh, I dropped my bags and didn't get on the plane and I went home and cared for her. And oh, mom, I love you so much. But the fact is that her mom died at 49, and her aunt had also died young. And breast cancer wasn't discussed in my family, but it was always looming in the background. I kind of just knew it to be a fact. So I was more taken aback that she now was saying these words and hadn't made some kind of provisions to perhaps prevent it. It was the early 1990s. There was no
Mhm.
internet. Whatever you're picturing today in terms of prevention didn't exist yet. But something in me, maybe the survivor in me, said, "Oh, of course, like of course you think you have cancer, and of course you're going to have it." And that didn't make it less painful, but it certainly um, dulled the shock. It was
Mhm.
more, oh, I've been waiting for you. And then, of course, she was sick for 2 years and went through hell and passed away. And 10 years later, almost to the day, it was also August when my dad called me. I was
Oh.
already married with a kid, and we were on a little family vacation with my 1-year-old son. And my dad called to say that he thought he had pancreatic cancer, which turned out to be colon. But either way, it was kind of cancer started to feel like this. Uh, I hate to use the word inevitable because that's you know, just terrible and don't want to put that out there, but it started to feel like, okay, there's a
Mhm.
pattern happening here. How am I going to reverse this? So the first two times it came, it was almost expected, as horrifying as it was, but the third time it came, which is when it came for me, that one shocked me, and that one really pissed me off, if I can say that on this podcast,
Yes, you can
because
say whatever
that
you want.
I had gone to great lengths because of losing both my parents to cancer to avoid it.
Mhm.
I ate all the right things and didn't eat the wrong things. I, breastfed my children, which I was told, as babies, which I was told was a good defense against breast cancer. I went for
Mhm.
regular mammograms and ultrasounds and MRIs. Even at a young age, I had my first mammogram at 30. So as I started to learn about genetic testing, which it wasn't a spit in a tube test at the time. It wasn't send it off and find out that you're zero point zero zero 0.001 Eskimo. It
Yeah.
was a blood test, and it was expensive. And you wanted to keep it private because we didn't know what insurance companies would do with that
Yeah.
information. But I had that BRCA test. I tested positive for the mutation on the BRCA gene, which stands for breast cancer. Unsurprisingly, I then found out at the same time about preventative double mastectomy, which today everyone knows as the Angelina Jolie surgery.
Angeli, yeah.
But she did hers 5 years after mine, so it
Yeah.
wasn't even a thing, and it was considered a bit drastic, certainly amongst people in my circles. And I knew, as much as I knew anything, that this was the route to go. Whatever was available to me, no matter how extreme, I said that is what I'm going to do because I'm I'm going to try to turn the ship around. I'm the oldest
Yeah.
of five kids. I was already by the age of 30, the oldest living member of my family, and I'm like, this is not just for me. My siblings have to see me doing whatever I can do. And it was so the preventative mastectomy was at age 34. 6 days later, I got a phone call. I've got drains and tubes coming out of me. I'm, trying to recover. It's Thanksgiving Eve. I've got four little kids running around. My mother-in-law's making Thanksgiving dinner downstairs in my kitchen. And I just felt so relieved, like I did it.
Hmm.
I got rid of this yoke, this burden that's been hanging over me. I reduced my chances from getting breast cancer from 87% down to 5%, which is better than the general population. And the phone rings, and it's my breast surgeon. Thanksgiving Eve, weird time to be calling, going, you're not going to believe this. We found early but aggressive cancer in one breast. You saved your own life.
Oh my gosh.
And so the third time it came knocking, it was unexpected,
Yeah.
quite the opposite. It was like, are you actually kidding me? And now there's a book about it.
Yeah, now there's a book about it. Geez, seriously. Well, I mean, I will say, talk about like hardships, but your humor. I mean, when I was reading your book as I was crying and turning the pages, your sarcasm and humor, like literally was like just like a support that lifted me up before you punched me in the heart again. But I mean, let's talk about finding humor in hardship because your memoir is known for dark humor. Your social media platform, like you share it, your sarcasm, your humor. How has humor been a coping mechanism for you through all of this?
I think humor is the greatest coping mechanism in the world. And I think people have been using it since the dawn of time. And it's certainly a very Jewish coping
Yeah.
mechanism. You'll see a lot of, um, it's not surprising to see, Jewish people taking on writing careers, especially humor writing careers, satire.
Mhm.
They're in TV writing rooms and late night shows because there's something in us that needs to survive. And in order to survive, you need to keep your spirits up. And it's really hard to do that when the chips are down and you
Yeah.
don't see the humor in even the darkest times. The challenge for me, that's just naturally my personality. My speaking voice is my writing voice, is my reading voice, is my meet you in person voice. We're all the same person. And that was important to me. I wanted my book to be instantly recognizable as my work, either to someone who'd read my personal essays or satire pieces before, or people who knew me in real life, or people who are getting to know me. Like,
Yeah.
here you go, this is me. But the challenge was, and I'm happy that you said that you laughed and cried in equal measures. And I did go for the gut punches, but I wanted to temper them with humor and not in an obvious like, two beats heartbreaking, two beats humor. It wasn't like that. It was more constantly adjusting and shifting and aligning the balance between, okay, I've delivered this very difficult piece of news. How would I like to receive relief from that? And my brain automatically, without me even being able to stop it, just makes it into a joke. It's very observational humor. Like, that
Hmm.
that TV show Scrubs, where
Yes.
right. So on Scrubs, the main character played by Zach Braff, he'll be in a hospital setting and his brain takes him to this fantasy sequence that puts him in this ridiculous situation. That's what my brain does. So it's great for writing because I don't have to work too hard to come up with these ridiculous scenarios. But it's also, again, it's a survival instinct. It's a protective method. It's almost a way of dissociating. Like I'm sitting in my chemo chair, there is red, disgusting, toxic sludge going into my veins, and my brain is coming up with a song about chemotherapy set to Under the Sea from The Little Mermaid.
Yes.
What I wrote in the book, I wrote the song out. That's exactly how it 15 years later, I just remembered the lyrics. Like that's just what came into my head. And I think I'm lucky that I do that naturally. And I'm privileged that I can share that gift with other people who maybe need permission to
Yeah.
laugh at dark times or to, have permission to say, look, this thing's happening one way or the other,
Yeah.
but why don't we take some of the wind out of its sails, take some of the power back by finding the humor in it?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I feel like laughter can be the best medicine. And it's so funny that you just brought up the Under the Sea lyrics because last night my husband and I were sitting at a class for my son, watching him like scale walls and do burpees or whatever. And I had your book and I was just flipping through reviewing like all my folded pages. At one point, I think it was like after chapter 3, I stopped underlining and I just literally started folding the pages of things I wanted to go back to and reread. But one of the parts was he literally said to me, "Are you singing the mermaid song?" And
I
he was
love
like, "I
that.
thought you were reading that book," because I had showed him the cover. And he's like, I was like, "You just don't even understand this book." He was like, "Is the mermaid songs in there?" And I was like, "She wrote an entire like chemotherapy script experience to Little Mermaid." And he was
In the
like,
voice of Sebastian the Crab,
I
that's what I
mean,
heard.
it was seriously, it's amazing. I love
Just
that your humor. I mean,
buckle
it's
up and come along for the ride, and we'll see where we land. But I promise you, we're going to laugh.
100%. Okay, so you've had this journey and did you always want to write this book? Like at what point during your journey of grieving and losing and healing did it pop into your mind, okay, you're going to write this book? Like what was there a spark, a moment? Is it something you always wanted to do?
Yes, and thank you for asking that question because I love answering this question. I've always felt like I've always been a writer at heart. It doesn't mean that I've been a professional writer or been paid for my writing, but I've always been a writer, whether it was creating like, family magazines or the literary journal in my high school, or
Yeah.
even like the notes I'd pass to my friends in class were kind of pretty epic, if you
See,
don't
it
mind my
paid
saying
off.
so. As in my purpose in writing the notes, something in me was like, I don't want to just communicate something to you. I want a reaction. I want you to laugh. I want you to be surprised by it. Probably should have been paying attention in class. But anyway, um,
Wow.
and so I majored in English literature in college, but I also had to pay the bills. I was, paying my own way, paying my own college tuition. And I just didn't know that the writer life it never occurred to me that I could do that as a career or as a living. I'd
Mhm.
already had a job in fashion while I was in college, and I just kind of continued that because it was a good job, it was paying the bills, and I love fashion too. That's my other passion.
Uh,
And I guess it wasn't until um, the very moment where I said I'm going to write this book was The first time I sat in my oncologist's office, when I sat there going, I was not supposed to have an oncologist. I was supposed to have a preventative double mastectomy, lounge in a lazy boy for 6 weeks, then
Yeah.
tell the whole world how great I am for having this preventative surgery. And, they should be preventative too. That was the plan, which is exactly what Angelina Jolie got 5 years later. I was like,
Yeah.
good for you, girl. Instead, what I got was 6 days of relative mental peace until I got that phone call, which led to an exploration of my lymph nodes, which we thought would have shown the cancer wouldn't have been in the lymph nodes. We thought it was contained, but there were micrometastases. So literally at like a microcellular level, we were watching this thing spread in real time and catching it as it was happening. But given my age, I was 34, given my family history, mom, grandma died in their 40s of cancer, and my genetics, BRCA1, my breast surgeon said, you really should see an oncologist, and that person will likely suggest that you have 8 rounds or some kind of preventative chemotherapy.
Hmm.
The thing with chemotherapy is your body responds the same, whether it's preventative or trying to shrink a tumor. So that was really a horrible thing for me to have to deal with, was like the very thing that I set out to avoid, because I saw my
Hmm.
mom go through it and it was so horrible. The thing I set out to avoid was now happening to me. And it was as I sat in her office and she was telling me this, like, you should have chemo. And I was bargaining, like, what if I don't?
Yeah.
Surely you got all of it out already. And then at one point she was giving me instructions like, your hair is, she was very kind and direct about it. She was really about my age. We're friends today. But at the time I'm watching this woman my age give me this horrible news. And she says, you should get a wig. She goes, get a fancy one. And by
Mm.
fancy, she meant a good quality human hair one, not like the ones at Ricky's behind the
Yeah.
register, like that Samantha in Sex and the City
Yeah.
wore, like the pink and purple ones. She could see that I was a person who put herself together, cared how she looked, had 4 little kids, and she suggested that I invest in a good wig. But when she said fancy wig, all I heard was, I saw Marie Antoinette. I'm like, okay, I'm going to get a Marie Antoinette wig, and I'm going to be walking through the aisles of Stop and Shop, and people will see my wig above the highest shelves. That was the very moment when she said that in that office, where something in my brain just said, I don't know how I'm going to do it or when or what it entails, but this situation is so absurdly ridiculous that despite my best efforts and what I've gone through in terms of loss and what I've seen and how hard I tried to not
Uh,
have the same thing happen to me, I'm like, there's a story here. So
yeah.
that marinated for about 10 years, which
Oh,
looked like,
wow.
I'm going to write a book. I'm going to write a book. I'm going to write a book. But that, yeah, there was an actual moment where I was like, this is happening. I didn't know anything else about it except that it was going to happen.
It was going to happen. So then what made you sit down and start writing 10 years later? Like, how old were your kids? And your kids were really young, 4 kids young when you were going through chemo and
Yeah,
wearing
they
your
were
fancy
1, 3,
wig.
5, and 7.
Okay. Wow.
They were really little. And over the years, right after the 8 rounds of chemo, I had my ovaries removed, which set me into menopause at 35. And then 2 months later, we moved to London for my husband's job. So there was a
Okay.
lot happening at the same time. New community. Um, I was still bald and wearing a wig. Like, there were just a lot of things that I would have preferred to not have to face or
Hmm.
explain in my new community, but that's a whole separate story. And I was still quite immersed in the business of raising kids, now raising them in a foreign country and learning how to drive on the other side of the street. And, you
You're taking
know,
motherhood to a whole other level. I
well,
mean,
people are like, how'd you do that? I'm like, I don't know. I just did. And it was actually a great distraction. Instead of wallowing in my own
yeah.
me, I was like, why does this country not have zucchinis? And it turns out they do. They're just called courgettes. And nobody told me that. So yeah. And then I think, as they got older, I started to get more like that bug in my head that said, why haven't you written the story? I was telling my story a lot in
Hmm.
small settings, in small circles. I'd partnered with a great Jewish women's cancer organization called Sharsheret. I've been involved with them from day one, and I was doing more advocacy work through them. um, something in me just said, okay, it's time to figure out how to get your writing out there publicly. And it happened step by step. A friend in publishing advised that I start a blog, which is now defunct, but it was called The Mom Who Knew Too Much. And it was
Hmm.
very parenting based, but I also talked somewhat about my breast cancer story. And it was an opportunity to see what is it like to write something for the public to read. That's
Hmm.
not, it wasn't a private website. Anybody could get to it. And from there, I started to just sort of connect with an audience and a writing community and see, oh, what is it like to write a personal essay and pitch it? Oh, I love these humor publications like McSweeney's and the New Yorker. I wonder how all these people are getting their pieces in there. And I just kind of took it step by step. And at that point, this was all being done in service of eventually getting an agent, getting a book deal.
Hmm.
I was, as they say, learning how to fly the plane while building it. I'm like, I'm in my 40s, choppity chop. This thing's not going to write itself. But that desire to tell the story was just not going away. And buying a new laptop didn't fix the problem. And taking a writing class didn't fix the problem. And
Hmm.
buying an ergonomic chair and an adjustable high desk didn't fix the problem. It was, you've got to just do it and figure it out. And it really took just finding the right community,
Yeah.
putting one foot in front of the other. I ended up working with a terrific person named Lee Stein, who's just this publishing expert, and she helped me write a proposal, and that proposal helped me land an agent, and that agent got me the book deal. But it was like, why now? The now only happened. I started writing this book in earnest when I started writing the proposal. That's about 3 years ago. But the years leading up to that was me showing up on Instagram and doing my Feel It on the First campaign. And
Hmm.
every month, without fail, never missing a first of the month, to post a picture of myself holding up two basketballs or frying pans or lemons or anything that reminds people of boobs, but in a
Yeah.
funny way, because that's, again, the humor is like the barrier breaker. Instead of
Yeah.
thinking that breast cancer is this terrifying thing that nobody wants to think about, I found this way to connect with an audience, like, haha, breast, and then people would send me their own photos of their kids' cereal bowls or clouds or
Yeah.
two nuclear reactors they passed by on the highway. They're like, look, I thought of you. It looks like boobs. And all that advocacy work ended up building a community of readers and people in the cancer community and other writers. And so, it's a very hard question to answer, sort of how long did it take you to write it? Or when was the moment you started? It was a long process, but if I had to point to one moment, is when I decided to get serious about writing a good proposal with
Hmm.
someone to help me do that, when I realized it just wasn't happening on my own. That's when things started to feel real.
Yeah.
And also, the more I would read books and write good reviews about them and tag authors and have authors write back to me saying, wow, thank you so much, I started to realize that authors are just people,
Hmm.
people who create beautiful art that I love. And I thought maybe I could do that too. Maybe I could be that for someone. I don't have to write for everyone, but someone out there is going to want to read what I write. And I look back now, I mean, I'm holding this thing in my hand, my book. I'm astounded. Look at it every day and I'm like, wow, this defies the odds that you did this.
Yeah.
But I didn't. I hope it gives other people hope to just go for it. Why not you?
Well, I think you're giving a lot of great advice because I think, with people who are aspiring to be an author or write a book, asking for help is really writing. The idea of writing something, I think, is scary. But, you mentioned things about community and like asking for help, finding somebody to help you write that proposal, leaning into other people and trusting them and knowing that you don't have to do it alone, I think is really good advice for somebody, that's listening and wants to write a book. Um, and also that it's not like an overnight thing. I mean, it's a journey. It's that proposal and then working the proposal and then shopping the proposal. And, and you were writing about things that were quite painful. And like you said, having to go back, almost travel back in time.
30
And then,
years, yeah.
yeah, it's,
And talking to people, I reconnected with an old friend of my mom's I hadn't spoken to in many years.
yeah.
I gave a copy of the manuscript to my sisters, to my husband, to some friends to ask them, what am I missing? What are your memories of this? What are your thoughts? Is there anything in here that you're not comfortable with. And there were some things, and out of respect, I took them out.
Yeah.
I was writing about my parents who are long gone and not here to defend themselves if I wrote something that maybe was a little bit less than flattering. I tried to be respectful, but I also wanted to be honest. And writing a book is just, it's a crazy thing. It's a
Yeah.
crazy thing, and yet it turns out that it's a doable thing. And listen, either you want to do it or you don't. And I know that sounds a bit simplistic, but the only person getting in my way really was me.
Mhm.
And I got in my way for a long time. And another thing that I'm proud of is that my kids are now 17, 19, 21, and 23. We're on an odds year. And with the exception of my youngest, who I'm working on, they've all read the book. And so they see that their mom, who for a long time was, I put my career on hold. I was a stay-at-home mom. We
Mhm.
came to this other country. We've, made a life in London, and they always know me as mom's home at the end of the school day, and mom's on the PTA, and mom comes into class and decorates cookies with the kids. And now mom is saying, mom was a person before you came along, and mom has other ambitions that
Yeah.
she hopes she can achieve without, dropping the ball too much on the other stuff that you guys still need. And they've read it and they've said the most beautiful things about it.
That's
And
amazing.
that means the world to me.
Yeah.
That they saw that I prioritized and I set aside time. Sometimes it was till 5 o'clock in the morning. I'd sit at my desk and then I would be unavailable the next morning because I was tired. But
Yeah.
they saw their mother setting a goal and really working hard to achieve it. And I think that's no small thing. And it was also a very personal story where they got to learn a bit about me.
Yeah.
I will never learn that about my parents. They know
Yeah.
things about me that I can never ask my parents. And what a privilege to be able to tell them this story. They wouldn't listen to it if I told it to them, but in the form
Yeah.
of a book, it's
You had to
like,
go and write a book.
well, I guess I'll read it now.
Yeah, and they'll have it forever. I mean, it really is. It's just a piece, a legacy that you've rewritten and or that you've written, and it's something that they'll have forever. And that's so beautiful. I hope each of them left a review on Amazon because all of those reviews count.
That's a good
You
question.
have
I do
four. They
ask
should each
anytime
go and
anybody
make,
texts me and says, "Oh, I loved your book." I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. Can you please leave an
yeah.
Amazon? Like, here are three free ways you can support my work. Tell a friend, leave a review,
Yes.
and leave another review."
Yes.
I don't know if they did, but I did give each of them right before I left to New York for my book tour in early July because the book launched on July 9th, and they my daughter they were all just all over the world, and
Yeah.
so some were at the launch, some weren't. I gave each of them a signed copy, with a
Yeah.
personalized message written to each of them. And I hope that's something that they'll hold on to for a long time. I hope it's one of those things that every time you move to another place, a lot of things get lost in the shuffle, and I hope this is one of those things that doesn't. I hope this is in the keep pile.
Oh, I think it will be. It's a beautiful book. The cover is amazing. I mean, everything about it. I literally adored, and I went back several times to all my folded pages and just read chapters because they're just like beautiful reminders and life lessons. Sometimes whether it's cancer or anything, that when something comes knocking at our door, we immediately are like, okay, we won't take life for granted. We've learned these lessons, but then life gets busy again, and we get caught up in life. And we forget that. We go into like autopilot mode, and we forget those lessons. So I don't know. I think it's something that I will put on my shelf because it's a beautiful cover and a beautiful story, but also
Thank you.
just
I
that
do love the
reminder.
cover.
Yeah.
Thank you for saying that. I wrote this on Threads the other day. So my blessing to all authors is that you love your book covers as much as I love my book cover. It was a long journey to get there, and my publisher was amazing at
Yeah.
working with me and giving me leeway and input. The designer, the artist was phenomenal. Um, she really took on board what I was trying to convey, and I don't think I could dream up a more perfect cover than this. I just love it.
Yeah.
I
It's
love it.
really great.
I love looking at it, and that is not something I take for granted. I know authors who, for whatever reasons, didn't get quite what they wanted or it missed the mark slightly. This is a memoir. It's my story.
Yeah.
I will hopefully be talking about this book for a long time to come. Breast cancer, unfortunately, is not going anywhere, so I'll have opportunities to share this with different audiences. And if you have to take something along with you and carry it around in the world, you better damn well love it.
Yeah.
And I do. And in terms of it's interesting what you said about we go back to our old ways. When you're at a funeral, you start making all these promises to
Yeah.
yourself about being idealistic and things that matter versus don't matter. But we are human. And I know very, very few people who function on this angelic level where
Mhm.
everything's a blessing and everything's amazing. And as lovely as it would be to be that way, that's not me. And I can very quickly snap back into the pettiness of life, or the things that don't really matter big
Yeah.
picture. But now I'm going to think of your words and what you just said. Like, if my book can snap you back into prioritizing, well, then maybe I can try to do the same thing for me.
Yeah,
So
I'm
thank you.
telling you, I put it right in front of my, I color organize my books, but I put it like right in front and turned it like with the cover because it is a good reminder. And I can relate to it personally because my husband and I actually said to him last night, I'm like, wow, like we're back into autopilot mode. Like, we have two young kids and we're doing all these things, but we said, we would not take life for granted. We would not take certain things for granted. And so we had that conversation last night. Like, this book, me reading it was a good reminder to like, watch out, we're back in autopilot mode. And, we are all human and it's not about making mistakes. It's just the human experience. We get caught up in things in life and sometimes we get petty. But yeah, your book is sort of like that
But
visual
it's a good
tool.
it's a good thing too. What you're saying is, when you're concerned with the mundanities and silliness of life, that things are okay,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, the thing I hated
It's a
most
good
about
point.
my cancer treatment was the loss of hair. It was very devastating to me. I set out to avoid anything remotely related to that, and this was a very visible, front-facing, public-facing side effect. And every time I walked to the chemo chair, for whatever reason, my chair was either in the middle or all the way at the end, and I had to walk past these other women who clearly I could just tell, were not having preventative chemotherapy. They were much worse off than me, perhaps had worse
Mhm.
prognoses. And I just thought, I bet they don't care about their hair. I always came to chemo with my wig, my hat. I looked put together, makeup. I was like,
Mhm.
I'm not entering the kingdom of the sick. Why are these women doing that? And I started to understand that maybe they've got bigger worries on their minds. And that was a real sobering moment for me too, where I thought, wow, I guess if my biggest problem is my eyebrows are falling out and I hate that, I'll just slap some pencil on.
Mhm.
Whereas there are some people sitting right next to me who kind of don't have the luxury of making that a big worry. So rather than saying, oh, we're back in autopilot, sometimes it's nice to say, how great is it that the worst thing that happened to me today is that someone took my parking spot?
Yeah.
Or I literally today I got a brand new bottle of vitamins in Amazon, and I was walking out of my car, dropped it in the driveway, shattered everywhere. All that's in the garbage. And I was like, all right,
Yeah.
well, that happened. So it's this constant balance. And then of course, there's the gratitude element where you can wake up every day, just
Mhm.
list a few things that you're thankful for, start your day that way. We don't go through the whole day like that, but we can make a piece of the day
Yeah.
be like that.
Yeah. And I think you brought up a really good point also. I think the magic is when things are not going right or when we drop our vitamin bottle or when someone takes our parking spot. It's our reaction in those moments that really show us the magic of who we are. Not like when everything is going wonderful and you're just like an angel and yes, you're full of gratitude, but it's when those moments when the vitamin bottle shatters or like for example, your daughter uses all your black ink in your printer and you can't print out your questions for your podcast interview because she's
Oh, that's
obsessed with
never
John
happened to me
Stamos and he
ever.
has to have black hair, a full head of black hair in his 50s. It's like, yeah, but it's how we react in those moments that really show like our true magic. So that's a really great
It's
it's
hard.
yeah, it's
It's
hard,
hard.
but we can
It's
always just keep going back to it. It's hard and we're human.
listen, it's like exercise. It's not like you can go to the gym for a week and say, "Well, I'm done. I don't have to go back to the gym ever again." We
Yeah.
are, as long as we're breathing and walking this earth, we have to be working on ourselves. And that is definitely a struggle for me, is not um, you know, having a proportionate reaction to things so that I can then not be a hypocrite when I tell my kids to have a proportionate
Yeah.
reaction to something. Like, one of
Yeah.
my sons sort of overreacted, I thought, to something the other day, and my instinct was to just, snarl right back at him and be like, ah, but instead I said, what's another way you could have said that? And we
Yeah.
both kind of laughed about it. And he's not a baby, he's 19.
Yeah.
We laughed about it and he, said it. So it's a good reminder to myself too that I can also say to myself in the moment, how else might have we approached that situation?
That's a good reminder.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to ask you something that's like totally not related to the book, like because you're just such an interesting person, the community that you've built on Instagram, like your vulnerability and your sarcasm, like what's like an interesting fact about you that no one would really expect? Like it.
Huh. Well, interesting is a relative word, isn't it? Um, I guess,
Or
I mean, I
something
guess
surprising.
that's such a hard question because I mean, I definitely skew more towards like there were things in the book that were humor wise were more male centric. Like a lot of the male readers, my friends'
Mhm.
husbands or men in the community are all picking up on these things that the women aren't. Like I love Flight of the Conchords and Monty Python. Like I've always
Mhm.
liked this very sort of dumb Mad Magazine type of humor, but I guess you would expect that about me. Okay, I bet people think that I'm an organized person. I come off as very organized. I think that I am a very high functioning ADHD person. I've never been diagnosed, but my brain is swirling and going a million miles an hour. The fact that this book exists is miraculous in so many levels, but if all you see behind me is my nice Zoom wall, right, with like my stack of books and my cool
Perfectly
wallpaper,
organized and
you
yes,
don't
set
know what's
up.
going on in the front over here. I don't have one place where I write down notes and ideas and admin tasks. I have post-it notes, a notes app, various notebooks. I'm literally looking at six different places where I have to-do lists, like, and it's not efficient. So I think that even in my personal life, my friends are surprised to learn that I am truly disorganized. All the things that I get done could be done with probably, 70% less expenditure of energy, but that's just not the way I am.
Yeah.
So I guess another way of saying it is that I'm a total poser.
Well, you wrote this beautiful book that's, you wouldn't think you could do that. So that's good to know. Yeah, I know if you saw what was going on behind me, I think we might be very similar in that regard. I'm a mess. I keep
That's
telling
what screen
myself,
that's what
but
screen parameters are
I know,
for.
right? I know.
What a
Oh,
blessing.
I know. I want to thank you so much for being here today and for sharing your story and your beautiful book, Dearly, Nearly Departed. I highly recommend this book. And it's not only something you can go back to, but then you can use it as a tool to remind yourself to just go back to the present, stay present in life and not really sweat the small stuff. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I also really I love your take on the book. I think I'm going to jot some of that down and put it somewhere where I'll forget where I wrote it down because it's quite a useful answer to, to other such questions. I hadn't really considered the not sweating the small stuff aspect of it primarily, but you're right, like that's a good takeaway. So thank you. Again, I said it at the top of the show and I'll say it again. Thank you for reading it so carefully and compassionately and so personally.
Yeah.
And thank you for having me here. And I want everyone to know that I was half an hour late to this interview because I put the time in wrong on my phone. So thank you for being kind and flexible and patient with me and letting me come on your show anyway.
It gave me time to rewrite my notes that I've already written, but are disorganized. So I had some like organized chaos happening. So thank you. It's
All right, so we're
totally
both we're
fine.
both winners.
We're both. Yes, we're both winners.
Cool.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining this week's episode of Surviving Roots. Let's continue this conversation as a community. For more updates about the show, remember to subscribe on iTunes and leave a review. Also, there will be some special bonus footage from the show on Instagram at carrie.fund. I'll see you there.